ערב טוב, מסע אל-חיר. מני, תודה שכינסת אותנו כאן. שי, תודה, ולבן ליר, תודה. אני מתחיל. את פועלת במצב טרגי. פרופסור פלמון, אמרתי את השם שלו נכון? פלמון? פרופסור פלמון tells מגי. מצב שבו אדם לחוד בין שני ערכים שכל אחד מהם יקר לו. Similarly, I come to you tonight in a position like Maggie's, caught between two goods. I feel caught between recognizing the honest and brave and heartful imagination of a friend I love and being honest to my own. To at once let many know how profoundly I value what he has done, and to let imagination be true to itself, beholden to no graven images, that is idols, of states, markets, tribes, personal fears or desires or phobias, is the path I must try to walk tonight. In a very personal, perhaps even idiosyncratic way, what I love about אפשר is its prose, simply its prose. It offers Hebrew as a language whose eloquence to even the syntactic level intimately reverberates with my native language, Arabic. They stand as languages that are קשורות אלו לאלו בעבותות. I confess I don't know what עבותות is, but it made me think of the word عبطة. عبطة means hug. عبطות, I said, oh, maybe it's like Manny's telling me, letting me think Arabic and Hebrew are hugging each other. And why not, since Khalid and Ella not only hugged each other, they brought a child to the world. So Arabic and Hebrew get to do that as well. As Maggie would say about the peoples. So אפשר makes it possible for this reader to approach Hebrew as a language capable of maintaining a distance from conquests, denials, and deceptions. I also was charmed by the story's heroine, her complex and contradictory character. I mean Maggie. By heroine, I mean Maggie. For someone like myself, who comes from a neighborhood, Wadi Nisnas in Haifa, where in the 50s, Arab women indeed sent their infants for nursing to Haim, the Iraqi Jewish neighbor, and whose grandmother told of how in Safad, Tzfat, my ancestral town, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish neighbors regularly borrowed food supplies from one another. Maggie shines like a guiding star on a freedom train. Maggie shines like a guiding star on a freedom train, seeking a way out of the darkness of her mental enslavement. She boldly attains an inspiring balance between humility and courage, perpetuously announcing, we are not afraid of the East. نحن لا مفحدين مع مزرح. If only other leaders would dare to learn what kind of freedom awaits them, should they follow Maggie in seeking to shed this elemental fear. It is tempting to try to find oneself in this East that Maggie and אפשר generally embrace, if at times like a European outsider. But I'm refraining from doing so. I'm also refraining here from focusing on the ways in which Maggie memorably succeeds in prevailing over fears or denials of Arabs and Muslims, and where she also fails. Shai, can I drink? صحة. Instead, I wish to focus on two topics that the novel addresses, which I know are especially dear to our many: art and liberal norms. Art and liberal norms. Let me start with art. For Maggie, art is a secular substitute for religion. Art may not provide as much meaning as does religion, but it promotes, she tells us, the status of the state's secularity. I assume that in saying these things, Maggie is concerned with furnishing the grounds for tolerance and pluralism in modern conditions. How do we get along, basically, when we're different from each other? Yet if modern history is any indicator, it is not clear what grounds we have to trust the modern category and practice of art as much as Maggie wants us to. To put it as a question, many, which Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, prevented the erection of a concentration camp in Europe? Which Camus, Albert Camus, interrupted French colonialism in Africa? And which Shakespeare averted ever the devastation of Ireland, for example? Imprecise as my questions may be, my point in raising them is a plea to caution. I would plead to caution. Now, 70 years or so after Fanon or Heidegger, especially after Heidegger's letter on humanism, which warns of the dangers of metaphysics dwelling in modern humanism, we might expect Maggie to be more wary of the redemptive power she places in art as modernity conceives it and practices it. Other also reminds us of the limits of Kantian aesthetics. Walter Benjamin noticed early on how aesthetic pleasure becomes an act of self-destruction among the alienated masses. His friend Adorno questioned poetry's existence after Auschwitz. And then there is, not far from here, the Lebanese poet Khalil Hawi, who felt his poems powerless, He felt his poems powerless when Israeli tanks entered Beirut in their 1982 operation, Peace of the Galilee, it was called, and resorted to the only power he had remaining. He killed himself. It is hard to duly appreciate Maggie's concern for art without understanding her liberal concern for and even cherishing of norm and normalcy. She thus speaks of ma'amatz l'shimur hanormaliyut, in aspiring for a normalcy of the majority. Since without this norm, violence, always the property of extreme subjects, religious and nationalist subjects, will prevail, or so we are asked to believe. My sense is that placing violence solely or primarily on the extreme and countering it with a supposedly benign norm clipses Maggie's wings of imagination in two ways. In two ways, the clips of the imagination wing is clipped. First, and cosmically speaking, it likely weakens Maggie's access to the extraordinary entailed within, which stands as a primal source of creativity and even divinity already in the ordinary. Second, and on a political note, it also conceals the norm's very constitution by and even ongoing participation in violence. Let me put it more concretely. This excess of trust in the norm makes it hard to ask in what ways might the majority's normalcy, Hanormali Cholarov, I think she calls it, be masquerading as a banality of evil. By which I mean the daily, ordinary, unthinking of normative populations, no matter the criminality, no matter the corruption, no matter the legality of normative violence. And so, Maggie's refusal to recognize the norm's violence has her locate violence among Rabbi Kook's disciples, wanting to purify the land from its impurities, the Goyim. Not though she does not locate violence in the Haganah forces, naming their operation to conquer Haifa in 1948 as nothing less than operation that was named Bi'ur Hametz. Similarly, Hen Efshar remembers how Jamal came from erased Tantura, but forgets its massacre in 1948. If you thought that in 2030 violence that at once constituted the norm and was constituted by it as the stuff of a dead past, then please think again. Under Maggie's reign, the state still enjoys ta'asiyah bit'hunit misakseget, hardly a dividend of peace. And it is hard to conceive that the violence of fringe non-state actors could ever outdo states in their violent destruction of bodies, lives, homelands, or generations, say as in southern Sudan or Myanmar or Gaza, all enabled by the normal and flourishing weapons produced, tested, sold, and operated by states. There is an additional violence concealed in Maggie's peace. Why else would the majority of states readily available to strike peace with Israel come from the ruling Gulf families of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, and Oman? And ifshar may mean to demonstrate history's power, history with capital H, and ifshar may mean to demonstrate history's power of isomorphism in telling us how regimes of feather perhaps flock together. If you have come to be as a Western installation by the Anglosphere, then you may enjoy premium entry into the region's new peace club, or century peace deal of the century. Excluded from this list and until much later, or not at all, are countries with marked democratic processes of representations, defective, flawed, and corrupted as those processes might be, including Iran, Lebanon, Tunisia, Algiers, and Sudan. Moreover, Maggie's peace appears to transform Israel, but in a deep way keep the Middle East largely stagnant. While Israeli youth can finally fulfill an old dream and drive unfettered to Rome, Paris, and London, Hen Ifshar gives us no clues to the freedom of mobility of Arab and Muslim youth. Can they similarly to their Israeli peers drive from Durman in the Sudan to al-Fahim, from Ta'izz in Yemen to Tangiers, from Kabul in Afghanistan to Kabul in the Galilee? That this Middle Eastern cosmopolitanism would do well for the Jewish people and the Israeli regime while keeping the masses of the region in the crony regimes that govern them appears to me, I worry, a dystopia. This imagination has already come to exist on some level. It is called Beit HaGefen in Haifa, a center for Jewish and Arab coexistence, where Jews come indeed to exist unafraid in Arab spaces. They would come to Wadi Nisnas, eat hummus, eat knafe, photograph the ruins, but after they leave, at the end of the day, the Wadi, like the region writ large, in Hen Ifshar stays exactly where it is. Well, maybe the streets are swept a little more thoroughly in Wadi Nisnas. Hen Ifshar imagines a people's homecoming to a region. I would like, and that's absolutely beautiful, I would like to see its sequel, the sequel to Hen Ifshar, envisioning the region's homecoming to itself, the region coming home to itself. For it is there where we might learn that alongside the flourishing, for it is there where we might learn that alongside the flourishing of the Palestinian, Arab, Muslim subject, a Jewish people might also come to genuinely flourish and not live to serve as an emissary of Western domination. I want to conclude with a question that Hen Ifshar brilliantly raises and begins even to answer. The question of tolerating plurality. How do we tolerate plurality? A question crucial to the fundamental health of persons and polities alike. For me, it raises this question by exhibiting the types of misunderstanding that can arise while attempting to address it. One type of misunderstanding that Hen Ifshar makes evident is the vision offered of Islam's presence in the land here. It views this presence as based on occupation and settlement, even equated with Zionism in this way. Yet, absent from this reading of from the more distant past in terms of the more recent one, and through paradigms of property law, is the recognition that Muslims here have not been others who conquered, settled, and in this way earned the right to property. Rather, Islam came out of this land and appealed to those already living in it, bringing into the folds of a community without force and far from uniformly a melange from the land's incredible historic diversity. Not only Byzantine Christians and Jews, but possibly remnants of groups far more ancient than both, Just for example, Jebusites, Canaanites, Moabites, Phoenicians, Nabateans, and so on and so forth. My point, what is my point in doing this? Is that if we want to bravely imagine, which I've seen Hen Ifshar do, then let us take Hen Ifshar not only to where Maggie and Jamal discuss the rightfulness of Arab and Muslim claims to the land, as in the following line, התיישבו בארץ אחרים, המקומות האלה כבר היו תפוסים על ידי חברה אורגנית בת מאות בשנים, שמכוח ישיבתה רכשה זכויות, וזאת על פי כל דין קניין מוכר בעולם. To be truly not afraid of the East, as Maggie would like us to be, then we might want to reactivate native muscles of religious toleration, as we remember flexing them in Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, Morocco, and Andalusia. And Maggie does a beautiful job reminding us of tolerance we once enjoyed. This reactivation could perhaps inspire this reactivation of toleration could perhaps inspire Fortress Europe of today not to be afraid of the other, a fear evident in the ongoing maritime holocaust off its shores today. To shed that fear, we may also be wise to shed the idea that the religious constitutes a phase we, people of the region, need to outgrow, and instead embrace that phase as a resource from our native heritage for recognizing the equal value of all humanity. By way of closing, I want to cite from the brief, tense, and soul-searching vacation that Maggie Oren and her spouse, Dan, had in Italy. I would like to conclude with the conversation they had at this Italian meal. From an unspoiled Mediterranean landscape, Hen Ifshar provides us with a beautiful and poignant question. It was one of the really most powerful moments for me in this novel, the conversation that took place between Maggie and Dan. Dan tells Maggie, את לא באמת מסוגלת להכיל אותי. To which Maggie responds, אולי אתה לא מסוגל להכיל אותי. In a similar fashion, the question Hen Ifshar so powerfully raises for me is, if we must live together, as I believe we must, then who is more equipped to contain the other? Who has greater resources for acknowledging and even cherishing the region's multiplicity? Who can make possible the homecoming not only of the Jewish people to be welcomed to the land just as any other community fleeing persecution, be they Baha'i, Druze, Armenians, Cherkessians, to name a few, as evident in the history of Palestine, but also of the region entire, which for over a century, since Sykes-Picot, has been suffering the ever-growing endangerment, if not de facto devastation, of its cultural rainforest. Thank you.